G'day folks. Well, if you're like me, sometimes you'll play a game and you'll instantly fall in love with it. It hits that sweet spot for whatever interests and tastes and mechanics that you'd like in a game, and you'll instantly love it and rate it highly, and it will be a core game in your collection. At other times you'll play a game and maybe it's mediocre or you won't like it at all. And then there are those kind of special cases where you fall in love with a game and for whatever reason, over time, that love wanes, and you come not to like the game so much anymore. Lately, I've been doing a couple of lists of my top games and honourable mentions, and in doing so, I've been kind of reflecting on these games that I used to love, games that I used to rank highly, some of them even 10 out of 10, but over time, I've soured on them. And by that I mean simply that I no longer think as highly of the game as I used to. So this video is dedicated towards games that I have soured on over time. These are not necessarily bad games. These are just games that, for whatever reason, at one time I rated very highly. I thought were some of the best games ever published, but with more gameplay, in perhaps overplaying them in some cases, in other cases finding out mechanics that I don't like, or finding out the way things interact that I don't really like, or tiring of the repetition of the game, for whatever reason, I don't rate as highly anymore. In some cases, I still rate these games quite highly. I'll talk about that in a moment, but just not quite the 9s and 10s out of 10s that I once thought. I want to begin this list by talking about a game that caused me to not only sour on the game itself, but just to sour on the whole series. And this is Bataille de Dresden by Clash of Arms Games. I thought this was an amazing game. It is an amazing game. It's a beautifully produced game by Clash of Arms Games. It is a monster. This is one of the biggest games I've ever played. It took me 3 months to play, and I was playing this for sometimes several hours each day, grinding through the turns. It's a huge map, 4 maps, the Battle of Dresden, Siege of Dresden. And I was playing a lot of the La Bataille series at the time. I had played through Ligny, Carthage, La Bataille de Montséjour, the full battle. Videos are on the channel if you want to check that out. I was playing through various other titles, Auerstat, and others. And then Dresden was sort of the most recent publication in the series. And they've just taken the production level up to another level. The counters look beautiful. Clash of Arms Games uses a gold and silver ink on a lot of their counters. The production quality was outstanding. The art was just beautiful. It remains one of the most beautiful games I've ever played in terms of what it looks like. And setting this all up and having the Allied armies move towards Dresden looked amazing. And again, you can check out the videos for evidence of that. Several months into gameplay, the Allies were sort of grinding through the outskirts of Dresden, and it was a strain to read the terrain below all these counters, different types of terrain effects. It's a heavy rule set. I was using the Regs 30 rules by this stage, so it was another complicating factor. The cavalry rules were complex, and not only cavalry, but cavalry in various terrain types. By the end of that 3-month period, I just stopped the battle. It looked like the Allies were kind of in the lead and pressing in on Dresden. The French were in trouble. They'd lost a lot of their infantry in the centre and out on their right, and so I called it for the Allies. But despite it recognising the outstanding kind of production quality and how strong a game this was, I was exhausted by playing that game, having played so many other La Bataille games in a row, and reaching that point where, yeah, it was a strain to grind through the city that I stopped playing. I was certain that I wouldn't want to play through Dresden again, and so I sold off my copy. I still have every other copy of my La Bataille games, and I want to return to those, but as it turns out, that was several years ago, and that was the last La Bataille game that I have played. I keep looking at my shelf and looking at the series that I've got, and I want to return, but that experience was really quite crippling in a way. It certainly damaged my love of the series. I moved from there to the Battles of the Age of Reason series, which I preferred. I've got a video comparing the two series, Battles from the Age of Reason versus the La Bataille series, including the Marie Louise rules as well. But I found the BAR system smoother, more streamlined. I played through some great battles at Fontenoy and Monmouth. And they were really good experiences. Much quicker to play through, certainly big battles, but not quite the grinding siege of Dresden. So that was one game that I really soured on. When I first started playing this, I thought it was one of the best games, and certainly the pinnacle of the La Bataille series, but perhaps too big for me and too long and too much of a grind. The second title that I want to talk about is a game that I used to rate 10 out of 10. It used to be one of my favourite games. I would have easily, a couple of years ago, I would have easily put this in my top 3, perhaps even my top 2, just behind Paths of Glory. The game I'm talking about is Here I Stand, published by GMT Games. There have been several editions or publications of this over the year. And it is an outstanding game, and I love playing this game. Whenever I get a chance, friends and I have played it. I've played this online on wargameroom.com a lot. I've probably played 30 games of Here I Stand over the years, and I really enjoy it. But I really dislike the use of a common deck. Now, when we play with friends, I tend to be the Papacy. The Papacy typically has the lowest draw of cards of all players, and it can be very frustrating in that game when you're drawing a very poor hand of cards, sort of 1 and 2 up cards. You've only got, say, 4 of these 1 or 2 up cards, whereas the Habsburgs have 7 cards and the French have 5 or 6 cards. That's one factor. 20 to 25 of those games that I've played have been the full campaign, running from 1 to 6 turns or so. But lately, my friends and I, because of time limitations, started shifting towards the tournament scenario. We figured we could speed things up and focus on the tournament scenario, which only runs for several turns. And yes, it speed things up a little, but that again crippled my experience with Here I Stand, because in at least 2, I was, as the Papacy in these games, of course, drawing really bad hands. In the meantime, in 2 of these games, the French player drew Diplomatic Marriage, and I think it's called a card called Copernicus, which gives you 1 or 2 victory points. And then they drew Diplomatic Marriage again. And in the meantime, I had these 1 or 2 up cards. And I just kind of began to reflect on the horrible imbalance that the use of this single deck for all players facilitates. Next turn, he's drawing Diplomatic Marriage again, and I'm getting another hand of 1 or 2 up cards. And it just... I posted about this in the forums. I said, this kind of sucks. And everyone said, oh, really bad luck. It won't happen again. The very next game we played, again using the tournament scenario, something very similar happened. They drew Diplomatic Marriage and Copernicus again. This same person, I think, playing France again. And I was the Papacy with his poor hands. And it just really brought to the fore that frustration with the poor hand, how I can't do anything. And I'm sitting here in this tournament scenario, which still runs for, let's say, 4, 5, 6 hours, powerless. So I'm sitting here watching everybody else do things. I'm sitting here watching the French accelerate in victory points while I can't do anything. And that really made me frustrated with the use of common decks in card-driven games. Paths of Glory is my favourite game because one of the reasons is every player, the Central Powers has a Central Powers deck, the Allied player has an Allied Power deck. So if you have a bad hand on turn 3, turn 4, it's going to be balanced out, or turn 5, it'll balance out. You know you're going to work your way through those cards eventually. If you have a bad hand, you're weeding out the bad cards. In Here I Stand, there is no way to do that. If you get a bad hand, your next hand could be bad as well, and the one after that could be bad as well, which is exactly what happened to me when I was the Papacy. So Here I Stand used to be a great game. I didn't like the tournament scenario, and I don't like the use of a common deck. And it crippled my enjoyment of that game. And we haven't now played that in a few years since we played the tournament scenario 3 times in a row, and it just wasn't a lot of fun. You don't get the full sort of story. It's much more intense and prone to those swings of luck. Related to this issue is my roller coaster experience with a third game, Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. I love Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. We played a lot. I have played probably close to 100 games of Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. That's how much I love this game. And I've spoken really recently about Caesar, Rome versus Gaul, the successors to this, both designed by Mark Simonich and published by, Caesar, Rome versus Gaul was published by GMT Games. Incidentally, here I stand, Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage and Caesar, Rome versus Gaul all use that the common deck, which is probably the biggest problem I have with those games, including Caesar, Rome versus Gaul. It uses a common deck, so you can get bad draws and there's no way to balance it out. It's not quite as pronounced as the problem I have with Here I Stand, because both players have the same card draws. They're both drawing the same number of cards. And there are fewer super powerful cards as there are in Here I Stand. Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, though, has a problem with Messenger Intercepted. Now, if you've played that game, you probably know what I'm talking about here. It's a card that enables you to draw a card from your opponent. Now, if you're the second player, the second active player in a turn, that means that you'll typically end a turn with the last card. But if you play Messenger Intercepted, that's giving you several turns above your opponent. And that is a critical imbalance, particularly on the very final turn of a game. And I have never liked, again, I've played about 100 games of Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, but I've never liked that being lucky enough to draw Messenger Intercepted on the final turn, or even on the second last turn, or on any turn indeed, is really swingy. The luck associated with drawing that card and the huge swing in power it can present or provide in a game, it makes me uncomfortable, even when I'm winning. And I'll acknowledge I am pretty good at home at Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. I played in the tournaments years ago online. I did really well. I wasn't beaten. I dropped out because I was busy. But yeah, it's a really good game. I really love playing this game. But Messenger Intercepted and the use of that common deck just kind of brings it down in my ratings. Yeah, so I had Caesar, Rome versus Gaul in my list of honourable mentions. Has the same problem, not quite to the same extent. Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage would probably be in my top 10 if there were no Messenger Intercepted card, or if there was a way to mitigate the effects of Messenger Intercepted in some way. It just provides too much of a swing in the game balance based on luck. Great game if you haven't played it. Check out Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage and Caesar, Rome versus Gaul. But that's why I've kind of soured on that just a little bit. It's no longer in my top 10. It probably used to be in my top 5, but after 100 plays, I still love playing it. Very replayable, but yeah, not quite right up there anymore. The fourth game is quite different. It is a game called Seventh Continent. You probably have heard of this. It is a beautifully designed game where you play as a hero, and it's a cooperative game, so you play alongside someone. So my wife and I love playing this together, or we used to love playing this together. When this first came out and we first started playing it, I rated this 10 out of 10, and I said to my friends, this is the best game of all time, you've got to go buy it. Over time, you're exploring this island, you're revealing these cards to explore this island, and it's a predetermined map, so you're revealing card 23 to go here, and then 24 to go next to it, and you're discovering this amazing landscape. And there are kind of clues and puzzles built into the landscape. You've got to figure out where to go. Along the way, though, it's a survival game. Your deck of cards that you're using for actions is really your life. And once that deck runs out, you die. So you need to keep replenishing this deck of cards by eating, basically food. To find food, you have to go hunting and fishing. And initially, that's quite interesting. We have to survive. We have to go find some fish. So we have to find places to hunt. We have to go to a river where there's fish to hunt. We have to travel, find this location, travel to it, hunt there, or find some animals in the forest and hunt them to survive, to keep the end game going. Over time, though, that need to sustain ourselves became quite a grind. And once we had kind of had most of the map discovered and we're traveling back and forth, trying to resolve the puzzle, trying to use these clues to find kind of the answer, to figure out what we're doing here and what we're trying to achieve, that became a grind where we weren't necessarily exploring anymore. We were just hunting and grinding and surviving, and that was kind of the bulk of our activities. So there were two experiences here. There was exploring the map, and that exploration was fascinating, and we loved it. And this is where the game was 10 out of 10 for us. But once we explored the map and we knew the map, and we were just moving around this map, surviving, because you've got to spend cards to move around, you've got to spend cards to do certain things, and that's your life point. Once we reached that point, the game had really lost a lot of its fun. And when we added the expansion, which adds an air balloon, that crippled us even more, because then we were exploring the map but in an air balloon, and all we could see was clouds. So cloud, 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 cloud. Here's an outcrop that we can land on. We're trying to survive, and the fun factor just sank for us. So Seventh Continent was a game that I used to rank 10 out of 10. And after playing that expansion with the air balloon, I put it on the market for sale. My wife was determined that she never wanted to play it again. It just became really frustrating and a grind for us, and we haven't played it since. Having said that, I have backed the expansion called Seventh Citadel, which the designers have clearly said that they have addressed this kind of survival element that people don't like so much. They've modified the gameplay, so it's more about exploring and adventure and less about survival. So fingers crossed that Seventh Citadel, when it comes out in 2022, when it arrives, will renew that enjoyment that we had with Seventh Continent when it first came out. There's a similar theme here with the next game. The fifth game that I've soured on is a game called Tainted Grail, published by Awaken Realms. It is very similar to Seventh Continent, and I backed this because we love Seventh Continent and we're hoping for something better. Tainted Grail puts you in the role of a regular person in sort of Arthurian England-ish era. It's a bit vague about where you are. You're in this other world, and basically that world is dying. It's decaying, and crops are dying, animals are dying, and you, as this farmer, peasant, basically have to go out and find out what's going on. These heroes went out, and you're not one of those heroes. You're just a regular person, and you're the last person kind of left in the village who can do anything. So you go exploring, and as with Seventh Continent, you explore this predetermined map. You're exploring, and along the way you'll fight these monsters. So there's kind of more to it. There's a very fascinating combat element to this, which we quite liked. You chain these kind of cards together. You develop new skills and abilities and enhancements and so forth. So there's kind of a bit of a role-playing or character development aspect to it. It's a great story around this. You find out about the Knights of the Round Table and the Grail, and I won't spoil anything there, but your decisions in this game and in this story and where you go and what you decide to do shape the story. So you could replay this again and the story could be completely different. And we had friends playing and their story was different to ours. So it's really good in the way that you are shaping the narrative that evolves. However, much like Seventh Continent, there is a survival element. To explore the map, you have to light what are called menhirs, giant statues that serve as torches that lighten up the landscape in an area around them, basically, in a 3x3 grid around that menhir, that torch in effect. Now, to light the menhirs, you have to sacrifice resources, and you have to gather these resources. And over time, initially that was interesting. Okay, we have to gather these resources, light this torch to shine our way, but they weaken over time. The light goes out, so you have to go back there and light them again. You can probably be guessing where I'm heading here. You have to keep lighting these menhirs whenever you travel. You got to light them, get the resources, light them. And it became such a grind, such that when we're exploring this landscape, and often you have to backtrack and go talk to people again, and then go to another town and come back again, and then go back to the town. You've got to light the torch constantly, and you're spending more time lighting these bloody torches than you are exploring the landscape. Once you have the landscape discovered and explored and mapped, you're just travelling back and forth, and sometimes you're being chased by monsters, and it just became this grind where we weren't really enjoying the story. It's a roughly 14-15 chapter campaign, and we reached a point where we were so sick of the grind that we decided not to light the menhirs. We were just going to read the story and find out what happened, and we basically read it as a book. We kind of moved around the map, fought the monsters, didn't worry about lighting the menhirs, and just kind of enjoyed the story, which we rushed through quite quickly. It was a very similar experience when we played another Awaken Realms game, Etherfields, that has a similar story, a similar grind through these minor little skirmishes that you have. And that has both put me off. It soured my enjoyment of Tainted Grail and Etherfields, but also kind of put me off the publisher as a whole. Awakened Realms is famous for their broad campaigns and story-driven gameplay, but yeah, I'm going to be very cautious backing another Awakened Realm game, just because they're quite long in terms of gameplay, but it's a grindy type of gameplay. Initially very exciting and fascinating, but over time it becomes an unenjoyable and repetitive grind. Shifting to the next theme, I've mentioned in my top 10 videos that my favourite game is Ted Race's Paths of Glory. And when I discovered that game, and when I fell in love with that game, which is still my favourite game of all time, I wanted to explore more of Ted Race. And so I went out and bought Barbarossa to Berlin. And again, initially, this was brilliant. It was the same type of gameplay, card-driven, point-to-point movement, Second World War, as Paths of Glory. Paths of Glory focused on the First World War by contrast. But it felt very similar initially, and I loved it and rated it very highly. I think I rated it maybe 9 or 9.5 out of 10. And I played it a lot, just like I've played Paths of Glory a lot. But over time I realised that Barbarossa to Berlin was different. It followed a more a stricter kind of, I guess you could say, narrative arc where the Germans advance into Russia and then the Russians push them back. And it became a bit predictable. You could tell kind of at this point, if the Germans haven't proceeded in a certain way, if they haven't destroyed Russia, Russia's inevitably going to defeat them. And it's been many years since I've played Barbarossa to Berlin, so I'm probably not remembering that narrative exactly, but it just became a bit predictable, a bit repetitive. There wasn't quite as much variation in gameplay as there is in Paths of Glory. Paths of Glory has scope for a lot of different things to happen. Barbarossa to Berlin just had a bit of more of a repetitive feeling, and so I sold that, and I no longer have that in my collection because I reached a point where I just wasn't enjoying it and probably didn't want to play it again. Given the choice in playing a sort of 4 to 8 hour card-driven game, I'd much prefer to play Paths of Glory than I would Barbarossa to Berlin, and so that was another game that I soured on because over time and playing many games of it, and I've probably played about 10 to 20 games of Barbarossa to Berlin, I just kind of didn't want to play it anymore. Another game that I soured on for different reasons is a game called Tapestry. Now, this is a Euro-style game, and my thoughts on this are a bit mixed because I love playing this game. My daughter plays this game, and she enjoys playing it. It's a wonderful game experience. Whenever I play this game, I have fun. It's a lot of fun to play. Basically, Tapestry revolves around 4 action tracks around the edge of a square board, and on your turn, you simply advance your action on you advance your marker on one of those 4 tracks 1 space. So I can advance on the exploration track, and I do the action shown on that track. And it could be as simple as discover a new tile. So I place a tile out and get the benefits. Or I can engage in a military action. It could be a conquest. So I conquer that tile and I get some benefits. Really simple actions. Choice of basically 4 things, but it's the blending of these kind of actions that creates a really fascinating series of tactics and strategy for you in this game. There are various elements. You've got your city element that you're building, so you're building up a city. You've got a resource management mechanic. You've got an engine building mechanic where you accumulate income, and then you've got a sort of a map board where you can sort of fight other people. It's very simple combat mechanics. You conquer their area, basically. What I soured on with this game is basically the victory conditions. They are all but meaningless. You make some really important decisions, and you can employ the best strategy, but your score can range from, my lowest score is about 90 victory points through to 340 odd victory points. And I didn't necessarily play better or worse between those 2 games. It's just I didn't get lucky with card draws and resource and technologies, or other people beat me to certain buildings. And so, yeah, whilst it's a fascinating game to play, and whilst I still love enjoying it, I have no expectations for victory or defeat or the outcome of the game. And that's kind of, it really undermines, it changes the way you need to approach this game, because you set out to play a game of Tapestry, and having played many, many games, probably 20 games of Tapestry, there are... what I'm trying to say here is I don't approach. I try to do my best. You're almost approaching it as a solitaire experience. I'm going to do the best I can and have fun, and we'll see what the victory points say at the end. You are given basically a civilization at the start, and they have a special power, and they are inherently imbalanced. Some are hugely powerful. The futurists basically jump ahead 4 spaces on a track. The traders are horrifically underpowered. I can't even remember what they do, but they're terrible, terrible power. So if I'm playing against somebody, a good friend, and they're the futurists and I'm the traders, I am certain that I'm going to lose. There is no question about it. And there are gameplay statistics from thousands of player games that reinforce this. And the designer added sort of some modifications where if you dealt the traders, you get a bonus 20 victory points. And that was an attempt to balance it, but it's not really... It doesn't really balance it. It just gives you a bonus victory point kind of thing. So yeah, Tapestry is a fun game where at the end, victory or defeat or the outcome doesn't matter because it's imbalanced. And if I win and you lose, it doesn't mean that I played better. It just means that I got kind of luckier with card draws and things like this. And a lot of people have challenged that. They said, oh no, you're just not playing it right. And I would direct them towards the gameplay statistics, where I don't think the traders have won barely 5% of the games where they've featured as a faction, whereas the futurists have won something like 60% of the games where they've featured as a faction. That's a huge imbalance, and it's hard to challenge. The statistics don't argue with the data. Having said that, it's a keeper in my collection. It's over here behind me, behind Spirit Island, and like I said, I love playing it, but deeply flawed. And so it's a game that I initially loved playing, and a game rated very highly until we began to realise this is really unfair. And what civilization you get is going to kind of tell you whether you win or lose. If I'm dealt the futurists, I can all but guarantee that I'm going to win the game against my friends, particularly if they're the traders. So that's Tapestry, a game that I would recommend you get for the wonderful gameplay experience, but with that caveat that if you worry about winning or losing, don't get it. Yeah. Okay, the next title is somewhat similar, and it's a game that I've spoken about in the past. I've spoken about War of the Ring in the past. This is another game that I've been playing for a long time, and I've played many games of. And I had the first edition when it first came out many years ago. This is, again, a wonderful game experience. I love playing this game, and it's very similar, I guess, to Tapestry. I love the game experience. It's a wonderful game, beautifully designed. And of course, when I play with my friend Barks, and he has these beautifully painted miniatures, and I've spoken about these in my video of War of the Ring, I enjoy playing it, but undermining my enjoyment of the game is what I think are flawed victory conditions. I strive, as the Free People's player, to set out towards Mount Doom and to enter Mount Doom, begin on that track with 0 corruption. So I'll rest and bring my corruption down, and I try to seed the cup with good corruption markers. Inevitably, this random chit draw, moving up the corruption track, sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, and I never like the outcome. I don't like that I either win the game because I got lucky on the draws, or I lose the game because I got lucky on the draws. I had one famous game, and I talked about this in the comparison video, where I had a shocking game. I had barely played any events to put better corruption markers into the cup, and I was being assailed on all sides by the forces of Mordor and reached Mount Doom, and I think I was on 2 corruption at the start, and I just thought, I'm losing this game, I've got no good counters in the cup, I'll just rush up Mount Doom and we'll be finished and it'll be over. There's nothing I can do at that point. I rushed up Mount Doom and I'm drawing counters and it's going terribly, my corruption is increasing. I reached the final step and drew a corruption counter from the cup, and it was a 0 corruption, and I won the game. And I felt terrible because my opponent had played so much better than me. He'd done everything perfectly. I had played poorly, made poor tactical decisions all across the map, and yet I won based on this draw. And we emptied the cup, and basically that one chit that I drew was the only chit left in the cup that I could have possibly drawn to win the game, and I drew it. Every other chip would increase my corruption such that I would lose. and that wasn't fun. It wasn't enjoyable to have that random chit draw determine the outcome of the game. It's always a good experience playing the game. It was always fun, whatever's happening, except for determining the winner. I feel like it should be something more meaningful, something that is earned, as I felt in that situation my opponent had earned. They had outplayed me across the board, including in the Corruption Cup. But again, drawing that one chit cost him the game. I don't like that. So War of the Ring used to be a top-ranked game for me, but I've really soured on the victory conditions, and for that reason, I guess I don't play it as much as I used to. Another game that really soured on me is Robinson Crusoe. This is a cooperative game about surviving on an island, and it's a worker placement game, so you'll place your workers can go and do different things. You'll explore the island, or you'll gather resources, or you'll confront challenges and all these kind of things. And it's a really fun game, and when we first started playing it, I loved it. Cooperative, survival, beautiful components, some fascinating decisions to make in terms of what do you do, how do you survive. I guess the problem here is that my wife and I overplayed it. We played this game so much, and when we got the Beagle expansion, this is where you're sort of on Charles Darwin's Beagle and you're engaging in specific missions. We played this a lot, and we were trying to get through the stories here, and yeah, probably played it too much and found that whilst we're doing slightly different things in the missions, it all felt very repetitive, and there weren't enough interesting decisions to make to sustain our interest. So that's a game that I subsequently sold. But again, it's a game that I used to rank very highly, about a 9 or 9.5 out of 10, that because of repetition and because of what seemed the lack of interesting decisions over time, I really soured on, and it came far down in my ratings and is no longer in my collection. It's a game that I also did some videos on. It's Nations in Arms. So I did some gameplay videos for this, and I also did the rules primer because it's another case of having a good game having a very frustrating rulebook. And for that reason, I decided to do the rules primer to help people understand the game and to share, I guess, what is a good game below that bad, poorly written rulebook. I soured on this because of the rulebook. After spending many dozens of hours reading this rulebook, studying it, and developing the primer to help other people, and playing through several scenarios, I reached a point after playing this quite a lot where I became so frustrated with the lack of answers in the rulebook. And it seemed as though the designer had just given up and wasn't interested and had moved on to other projects. It was very difficult to find answers to certain things. And yeah, I soured on that because of the rulebook. It's a good game if you can find answers to your questions. It's Nations in Arms by Compass Games. And again, I rated it very highly when I was initially playing it, but as I kept coming across these obscure rules questions and just could not find answers. And it was an economic question in particular that really just crippled me and broke my enjoyment. I was at the end of a year and I had a question around budget, and I can't remember what it was, but I just could not find an answer anywhere. And I said, screw it. And I packed the game up and I haven't played it since. So it's an example where a poor rulebook can really cripple an enjoyment of a game. And for me, it really soured my experience of Nations in Arms, such that whilst I've still got it in my collection, and whilst I think I may return to it someday, it is certainly not rated as highly as it once was. The last game I want to mention is another bit of a roller coaster ride. It's another card-driven game, and it's a very popular game, Twilight Struggle. So I've played Twilight Struggle hundreds of times over the years, and that's probably why I've soured on it. I have just played this game so much. I suck at it, incidentally. Despite playing this hundreds of times, I'm really not very good at it. I play Twilight Struggle quickly. It's not a game that I think about a lot. Maybe I get a bit too confident in myself. I've played this game so many times, I know what I'm doing, when I just don't pause and study and think about the broader situation. So I loved this when it first came out, and incidentally, it's one of the first war games. I don't know, that's debatable, but it's one of the first kind of games that got me into wargaming many years ago when this first came out. I was playing this a heck of a lot. It was accessible as an online community on Vassal, and I was playing this on an almost daily basis. And it was around the same time that I discovered Paths of Glory and then started playing heavier and more complex games and war games. But over time, I just played it so much that, yeah, I guess I got sick of it. And yeah, a game that I rated highly and then soured upon purely because I played it too much. It never happened with Paths of Glory. I still love playing Paths of Glory, but Twilight Struggle, I guess it felt a bit more chaotic than Paths of Glory. You never know when those scoring cards are going to come out, and you could be dealt a hand of cards. Again, using a common card deck. Maybe that's the thing here, where sometimes you get a bad hand and your opponent might have a good hand. Maybe that was the source of my frustration. So I soured upon it. And it's only been relatively recently, in the past perhaps 2 or 3 years, that I've begun to play it a little bit more and renew my enjoyment of Twilight Struggle. I got a copy of the deluxe edition last year, I think it was last year, and started playing it again. And it's been renewing my interest such that it's kind of risen up through my rating, and I'm enjoying it more than I used to. But it's been a bit of a roller coaster. And I soured on that simply because I played it. I played it too much. As I said, I've played at least 100, probably 150 games of Twilight Struggle over the years. So folks, that's my list of games that I have soured upon. These are, and again I want to emphasize that they're not bad games. These are, in many cases, games that I still rate very highly. War of the Ring, Tapestry, Here I Stand, and Hannibal, Rome vs. Carthage are games that I still love to play and still rate relatively highly. But for whatever reason, not quite as highly as what I used to. So look, I'd be keen to hear from you guys. What are some games that have soured in your view? Are there any games that you used to love, that you used to rate 10 out of 10, that used to be your favourites, that are not anymore? I'd be curious to hear what they are, and in particular why you've soured upon them. Whether it's discovering a mechanic, a victory condition, a flawed victory condition like Tapestry, or a flawed mechanic like the common card deck. I would love to see designers just get rid of those common card decks. I'd love to see Here I Stand with personalised card decks, a card for the papacy. Oh, that would be a brilliant game. Hannibal, Rome vs. Carthage, a card for Rome, a deck for Rome and a deck for Carthage. That would be brilliant. But yeah, let me know what you think. Can improvements be made to these games? Should there be expansions for Hannibal, Rome vs. Carthage, Twilight Struggle, Caesar, Rome vs. Gaul, and others? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching, everyone.